Alright, listen up, because we need to talk about something they don't want you to know. Something they've been trying to hide behind all those fancy press conferences, diplomatic smiles, and big, empty words. I'm talking about sanctions.ia. That word sounds powerful, serious, like a real punch in the gut. But let me tell you the truth, the one that's got folks in power squirming, the sanctions America keeps throwing at India. They're not hurting India the way they thought, no sir. They're actually hurting America far more than anyone expected. And that's exactly what I'm going to break down for you today, the shocking truth they're desperately trying to keep from you, America's sanction addiction. You see, America has this habit. They still act like they run the world, like it's the 1990s. They think they can just pick up the phone, press a button, and everyone else will just fall in line. You disagree with them. Boom, sanctions. You dare to buy oil from someone they don't like, bam, more sanctions. You try to grow your economy your own way. Slap, another round of sanctions. That used to work, you know, it really did make countries tremble. But not anymore. Not here in 2025. Not when India's in the game. Let's rewind a bit. Back when the US slapped sanctions on other countries, often worked because the whole world was deeply dependent on American dollars, American companies, and American technology. But India isn't playing that game anymore. India has been tirelessly building, grinding, innovating, and stacking its own deck. And here's the real kicker. Every single time the US has tried to punish India economically, all they've really done is push India to become more self-reliant, more innovative, and frankly, more fierce. And what did America lose in the process? A whole lot more than they bargained for. Let's talk about real business. The kind that puts food on your table and keeps the lights on in your house. Big American companies, the ones you hear about on the news, used to love India, and they still do. Why? Because India's market is absolutely massive. I'm talking about 1.4 billion people, with a middle class growing faster than a wildfire. People are hungry to spend, to buy, to build. Now, when America tries to isolate India with sanctions, they end up shooting themselves in the foot by hurting their own companies. Think about Apple, Google, Boeing, Tesla. They all have significant investments in the Indian market. And with sanctions looming, those very companies start sweating bullets. Because if you can't sell in India, you're not just losing a sale, you're losing out on the future. India's rise despite pressure now. Let's get into tech. The tech war is the real war these days. It's not fought with bombs, it's fought with semiconductors, AI, satellites, and data. And guess who's catching up, and fast? India. The same India they thought was lagging, is now launching its own satellites, building out 5G and working on 6G, developing advanced AI platforms, and creating alternatives to Western payment systems. When the US tried to choke India's access to technology, India didn't cry. They coded, they built, they adapted. Meanwhile, American tech firms lost access to a massive user base. And when you lose users, you lose power, influence, and leverage. So, who's really bleeding from these sanctions? Here's the part folks in Washington don't want to admit. India now has options. Real options. Russia, China, the UAE, Brazil, France. They're all lining up to shake India's hand because India isn't a junior partner anymore. It's a major global player. So, when the US tries to corner India, India simply pivots, finds a new partner, builds a new trade route, or signs a new deal. That's chess, not checkers. While America is busy trying to teach India a lesson, India is rewriting the rulebook. And let's not forget about energy. This one is huge. America got seriously upset when India started buying oil from Russia, especially during times of global tension. So, what did they do? They threatened sanctions and tried to flex their muscles. But here's the truth. They didn't stop India. In fact, India basically said, we're going to buy what we need, at the price we want, from whoever we choose. And you know what happened next? India refined that oil, kept the country running, and even exported some of that refined product back to Europe. That, my friends, is what I call flipping the script. Meanwhile, the US lost its grip on energy influence. That's not just economics, that's leverage. And they gave it up trying to control something they simply can't. How sanctions boomerang back. Let's dig into defense. Oh boy. America thought they had that one locked down. India used to buy billions in weapons and technology from them, but now, India is building its own indigenous missiles, fighter jets, drones, you name it. The sanctions forced India to invest in itself. And now, US defense companies are biting their nails because they're not just losing a customer. They're watching a competitor rise. A competitor that's building better, cheaper, and faster. That's like handing your opponent your playbook and then acting surprised when they beat you at your own game. And here's the cold truth. When you play dirty with a country that's smart, hardworking, and proud like India, you don't weaken them. You wake them up. India's youth were inspired. The engineers, the coders, the scientists, they didn't pack up and leave. They stayed and built. Sanctions didn't bring fear. They brought fire. And America, they lit the match. And now they're watching the blaze grow on the other side of the world, completely out of their control. Let me tell you something else. Every time the US tries to isolate India, they actually isolate themselves. Because the world is watching. Africa is watching. Latin America is watching. Southeast Asia is watching. And they're all thinking, if America can try this with India, they can do it to us too. So, what do? They move closer to India. They diversify. They start building a new world order, not one controlled by a single nation, but one where power is balanced. That's how you lose global leadership. Not with a bang, but with a bad decision repeated too many times. Trade routes, investment deals, diplomatic trust, it all starts to shift. And every time it shifts away from America, it takes jobs, money, and influence with it. So, when the headlines scream US sanctions India, don't believe the hype. Read between the lines, because the real story is this. America is slowly losing the very leverage it once bragged about. And India isn't just surviving. India's thriving. You want to know how you really measure if sanctions are working. Look at the numbers. Look at the facts. Look at who's growing and who's struggling. India's economy is booming. Manufacturing is on fire. Exports are up. Stock markets are flying. New unicorn startups are emerging every month. Meanwhile, US companies are pleading for exemptions, losing contracts, and watching competitors take their place. That's not strength, that's slipping. And let's not even get started on currency. The dollar used to be untouchable, but now India is trading in rupees with other countries, signing deals in their own currency, creating their own systems. They're essentially saying, we don't need your money to grow. And if more countries follow India's lead, the US dollar's dominance is going to face the biggest challenge it has ever seen, and that's not a threat. It's a reality they created all by themselves. Global perception shifts. The thing about power is it's not about how loud you shout, it's about how many people still want to stand beside you when things get tough. America's sanctions are turning friends into strangers, allies into competitors, and India is making new friends every single day. Hosting world leaders, signing massive trade pacts, playing peacemaker, building influence not through fear, but through respect. That's how real power works. And you know the wildest part. India isn't even bragging. India isn't out here shouting from the rooftops. It's just doing the work, staying focused, building quietly, while America is busy trying to flex its muscle. India is building muscle, and it's showing in every field, from space tech to pharmaceuticals, from green energy to IT. India is stepping into spaces once dominated by the West, not because they were invited, but because they earned it. Now, I know some folks might still believe the old lie that sanctions make countries behave, that pressure brings change, but let me break it down for you plain and simple. India isn't folding. India isn't begging. India is adapting, evolving, and winning. And every sanction just adds fuel to that fire. Because when you try to bury a nation with history, culture, talent, and pride as deep as India's, you're not planting defeat. You're planting a revolution. Why India refuses to box. If anyone out there still thinks the US can bully its way through the 21st century with the same tactics they used in the past, they better wake up. This isn't the same world, and India isn't the same country. This is a new game with new rules and new champions, and the more America tries to push India down, the higher India rises. That's the shocking truth. That's the untold story. Sanctions were supposed to be a weapon, but guess what? India turned them into motivation, into innovation, into momentum. And America's left holding the handle of a weapon that's no longer working, wondering why their grip on global leadership is slipping. That's how you lose power, slowly, quietly, and by underestimating the one country that refused to back down. Every sanction on India accelerates the decline of US global dominance. That's the truth nobody wants to say out loud in those big rooms, wear power suits, sip lattes, and think the world still revolves around them. See, sanctions used to be the big stick, the one move that would make countries tremble, rethink their decisions, and fall in line. But not anymore. Especially not when the stick is being swung at a giant that doesn't just stand tall, it grows taller with every hit. India isn't folding under pressure. India isn't scared. What it's doing is flipping every sanction into a stepping stone. And every time that happens, America loses just a little bit more of its grip on the world. Let me break it down for you real slow, real clear. The United States built its global dominance on control. Control over money, control over technology, control over defense, control over narratives. For decades, they were the gatekeepers. You wanted access to the world economy. You had to go through them. You wanted top-tier weapons, software, satellites. You had to knock on their door. You wanted legitimacy. America had to stamp the paper. But then along came India. Quiet, focused, patient, and proud. And the moment the US tried to flex with sanctions, thinking India would crawl or cry or compromise, something else happened. India stood up. The fall of the dollar monopoly. Every sanction became a mirror, showing America how much the world had changed. Every sanction revealed just how much power had shifted without Washington even realizing it. See, when you push a nation like India, a nation with 1.4 billion people, a 5,000-year-old civilization, a rapidly growing economy, and a youthful, tech-savvy population, you don't weaken it, you sharpen it. You give it a reason to build what it once borrowed. You give it fire. And now the US is seeing the consequences of that miscalculation, because every time India finds a way around a sanction, a workaround, an alternative path, it sets an example for the rest of the world. It says, hey, you don't need to play their game. Build your own board. The financial dominance America once enjoyed is eroding. That mighty dollar, the one that backed global trade like a sacred currency. India is trading in rupees now, with Russia, with the Middle East, with Southeast Asia. And every deal that happens outside of the dollar weakens its hold. That's not just about money, it's about control. It's about influence. And once that starts to crack, it doesn't take much to watch the whole system shake. You think those sanctions are just affecting India? No, they're shaking confidence in the US financial system itself. Countries are watching, and they're saying, if America can sanction India for making its own decisions, what will they do to us? That fear doesn't bring countries closer to America. It drives them away. So, guess what they do? They start cutting deals with India, with BRICS nations, with China, with whoever isn't holding a club over their heads. And just like that, American leadership starts slipping, not from a direct fight, but from sheer rejection. World realignment begins now. Let's talk about tech. Oh, the United States thought they had the digital keys to the kingdom. And for a long time, they did. Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, giants that touched every corner of the globe. And when they thought they could sanction India into submission, what did India do? It built. Indian engineers, coders, scientists, they didn't back down. They stepped up. They created their own chips, their own platforms, their own solutions. And every new innovation that replaces an American product chips away at that digital empire. You see, the moment a nation like India becomes self-reliant, America's monopoly ends. And not only that, Indian solutions are now going global. Countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, they're buying Indian software, Indian satellites, Indian defense systems, because they know they won't get slapped with sanctions for using them, because India doesn't play the bully, it plays the partner. And that's dangerous for America's dominance, not because India is hostile, but because India is trusted. That trust is powerful. It can't be bought, and America, through its own aggressive tactics, is losing it. Every time the US imposes a sanction, it has to ask its allies to go along. But guess what's happening now? The allies are getting tired of being dragged into economic battles that don't benefit them, tired of watching America make decisions unilaterally and expect everyone to follow blindly. Countries like France, Germany, Brazil, they're starting to say, hold up, we want our own relationships with India. We're not cutting ties over your political chess games. And that right there, that's how alliances weaken. That's how coalitions crumble. Not with a big announcement, but with little acts of defiance, one country at a time. And every one of those defiant moves shifts power away from the US. India's strategic countermoves. Then, there's defense. See, America thought it had India on a leash when it came to weapons and military tech, but sanctions forced India to double down on its own defense industry. And what we're seeing now is a monster rising, an Indian defense sector that can design, build, and export missiles, drones, tanks, and jets. And now, other nations are lining up to buy from India instead of the us. Why? Because it's cheaper, because it's reliable, because they don't have to worry about sanctions or restrictions, and every Indian-made weapon sold replaces an American one that's lost revenue, that's lost influence, that's lost ground. And let's be real about what's happening culturally too. American soft power was once unbeatable Hollywood, media, entertainment, education. But India is now telling its own stories, creating its own movies, music, tech platforms. Students are staying back, startups are staying local. The brain drain is slowing, and the brain gain is kicking in. All of this means less dependency, less influence, less reach for the US. Every sanction makes India double down on building homegrown strength, and every ounce of that strength takes away from America's global projection. What Washington doesn't seem to grasp is that the world isn't unipolar anymore, it's multipolar. And in this new world, you can't just pull strings and expect everyone to dance. India is showing the world that you can say no to the United States and still grow. You can push back and still thrive. That's a revolutionary idea. And revolutions don't stay quiet, they spread. So the more America tries to punish India, the more India becomes a symbol of resistance, of strength, of independence, and that shakes the very foundation of the US-led global order. A new power map emerges. You want more proof? Look at global events. India hosts summits now that truly matter. It leads initiatives. It's brokering peace deals, pushing climate agendas, building coalitions. That's not just a regional power, that's a global leader. And America, while busy sanctioning and scolding, is losing the room, losing the moment, losing the future. Because dominance doesn't just come from wealth and weapons. It comes from influence, from who the world listens to. And right now, more and more ears are turning east. So, every time America signs off on another sanction against India, thinking it's delivering a blow, it's actually throwing a boomerang. And that boomerang is circling back fast, hurting their own companies, alienating their own allies, and weakening their own hand. The more they try to tighten the leash, the more it slips through their fingers because India can't be caged anymore. That time is gone. And here's what they're not ready to admit in those DC boardrooms. India doesn't want to dominate the world. It wants to coexist, to trade, to grow. But if pushed, if challenged, if underestimated, it will lead. And it will lead with the kind of calm, collected, unshakable power that makes old empires tremble. Not with rage, but with results. And America, it's watching the baton get passed while pretending it's still in the race. Final words. India's silent victory. So, while the US keeps hitting the same tired button labeled sanctions, thinking it still runs the system, India is busy building a new system. A system that doesn't need permission from Washington. A system that doesn't fear punishment. A system that includes the rest of the world in a way America never did. And that's the part that stings the most. Because when India rises, it doesn't just rise alone, it pulls others up with it. And when that happens, the pedestal the US stood on for decades doesn't just lower, it crumbles.